Good afternoon, everybody. This is Parrish Alford and John Pitts. On my right, this is the weekly segment we call Talking with Boss, talking all things Ole Miss football and around the SEC. John, how are you? Good to have you here.
Doing real well, thank you. Trying to stay warm. It's a trick these days, seems like.
That's okay. We'll get it done. We'll adjust. I'm enjoying the fall. You know, we're having some fall. We're not going straight from summer to the dead of winter, which we do sometimes.
It's true.
And speaking of the dead of winter, Ole Miss on its journey could have been there. Had a few plays not turned out differently against Ole Miss. But, you know, as I have said many times on the blog and on this program, you go back and you look at single plays that make a difference in a game and a season. And, of course, it looked like Ole Miss against LSU might play out the same way that the Texas A&M game did, had they gone 3 and out and given the ball back to Zach Mettenberger on that last drive.
Right.
But I go back to 3rd and 5 and a 5.5-yard scramble up the middle by Bo Wallace, and you know they go on and they have a very good drive there at the end. I guess the question, John, this week around Ole Miss is we've seen the Rebels spend themselves emotionally in games and lose, and then come back and play well the next week. There are several examples of that. The LSU game last year after Vanderbilt is an example. The Auburn game last year after Texas A&M is an example, and then the LSU game this year after Texas A&M again. My question is, what do you think about the emotional aspect of Ole Miss coming off that high and going into a game where they're expected to win big?
Well, they're extraordinarily fortunate in the draw here. Idaho's horrible. I mean, Fresno State beat them maybe 50. So, I mean, I don't think victory itself certainly should not be a question. Now, if you want to play the margin of victory game, perhaps, Ole Miss has an exceptional opportunity here over the next 4 weeks to pad their win total heading into a game at home against a Missouri team that's the big surprise, at least in the SEC Eastern Division. And so I would say at this point, from Ole Miss standpoint, that even beyond the emotional element is, good gosh, they cannot afford to get anybody else hurt. Holy cow.
Well, and you know what? And along those lines, and Hugh Freeze has referred to the gauntlet on the schedule, the games against, really just about everybody, Texas and then Alabama, Auburn, Texas A&M, and LSU, only the latter 2 of those at home. He's referred to that as the gauntlet, and they are a beaten-up football team right now, but they also have the unusual opportunity during the season to rest some people if they take care of business and come out with the intensity that they say has been a priority this week in practice. These starters are going to play. They will dictate how long they play.
Right.
If they come out and pin a couple of scoring drives on the Vandals pretty quickly and run up a score, then they're going to come out of the game. And probably, Jeff Scott, maybe you want to work him back in if he's healthy enough, but he doesn't need to play in this game. And you've got some defensive guys who you should be able to contain Idaho's number 3 quarterback without. These starters will dictate how long they play, but conceivably, they're gone by halftime, and then you go into an open date. They have a chance to pick up an unusual amount of rest in season before that Arkansas game comes around here. So,
and I thought the Arkansas game was going to be crucial earlier in the year in terms of how the Ole Miss season turns out. And obviously, you don't want to get beat at home by Arkansas, but any notion that we had in August or early September that this was an improved Arkansas team we've been disabused of that. They're terrible. And so you ought to be able to lay a right whooping on them when they come in on November the 9th. To me, I'm looking, the one thing you don't want to sleep on here is you don't want to sleep on Troy, because Troy will fling the ball around. And that's just a game where motivation and not looking past them to Missouri is going to be an issue in the locker room. There's just no way around it. that would be the thing beyond just this question of how awful would it be to play Idaho and you've got the game in hand and then suddenly a key performer gets hurt. That would just be a disaster.
Right. I could see that Troy game lining up as a trap game also because they're going to score. You know, they're going to score points, although they did not against Mississippi State.
So, well, that was a surprising, is that just an internally a weird matchup for them or what? They way underperformed what I would have expected from a Troy team. And frankly, results since then suggest that this is not a vintage Troy team by any means. They've struggled with UAB, I think, and nevertheless, you got to go out, strap it up, and be prepared to play because that is a good coaching staff, and they will find some things to pick you with.
Yeah, and they struggled against South Alabama, but I'm looking now, and so did
better.
Tennessee.
South Alabama's better,
and South Alabama's gotten to a competitive state fairly quickly.
Yeah, they have.
Yeah. So that is interesting. Is that an example you think of just the athletes in Mobile and on the Gulf Coast, or I can't name you the head coach at South Alabama right now.
I no, not a clue.
Yeah.
We've got a South Alabama man on our staff, but they very quickly sort of become one of the little low-level surprises around the. I think Tulane having a good season is a surprise.
Yeah, that's. I saw a quote attributed to Curtis Johnson, the Tulane coach, earlier in the week that says this success has earned us 10 more fans on the bandwagon. So,
wow.
Anyway,
wow.
It is interesting to watch the success at Tulane, that program that has struggled for so long, and to see them have some success. So anyway, John, getting back on the Rebels here, like we said, I could see Troy as a trap game. They really should be bowl eligible by the time that game comes around. They really should win, I think, against both Idaho and Arkansas. Wanted to ask you about Bo Wallace. Hugh Freeze called his LSU game the best of his career at Ole Miss. It did not include a touchdown pass, nor did it include an interception, but Wallace did go 30 for 39 in the game and 346 passing yards. I was surprised at the level of Twitter negativity directed to Wallace after the Texas A&M game. I'm wondering what you've thought of his season so far.
Well, I think to me, it's. I wondered if he was taking enough risks. We talked about that. I don't think it's as vertical as you'd like, as we might have thought they would need to be in terms of really trying to test things downfield. But, and sometimes this word is used critically, this phrase is used critically, but he established himself as a pretty good game manager in this LSU thing. And I think he's a veteran guy, keeps a cool head. And look, on balance, would you take no touchdown passes against no interceptions in a setting like that? Yeah, I think you probably would.
Absolutely, because the passes that aren't going to the end zone are getting you down to the 4 and setting up a short field, and let your running backs take over from there. I mean, if you're a good team, if you're a balanced team, you need to have a running game that's going to punch it in from there. And Ole Miss punched it in with Barry Bernetti rolling out and hitting Nick Parker, who will play a bigger role in this game.
People on Twitter were like, "What? Nick Parker? He's still what? Huh? Really?" Without that losing Ingram, that doesn't help. And we. For several years around here, we'd always talk in August about tight ends, and then it seemed like you'd look up in November and tight ends hadn't done anything. And that's changed. I think that has changed probably across the board in all of football, but I think in this program, the ability to have a tight end who can do more than block is crucial.
Yeah, that certainly has changed at Ole Miss. I also think the loss of Evan Ingram can be overcome much more easily than, say, the loss of another defensive player. So if you're going to start judging injuries like that, I mean, it hurts any time you take a weapon of that magnitude away from your offense. But look, you can put another receiver out there. You can do some different things. You can run that big package more in your run game. Losing Evan Ingram is a big deal, and it hurts, but it's better that it's Evan Ingram as opposed to yet another defensive player. And maybe this rest that we've talked about will play out this way, and the Rebels will get healthier on that side of the ball. Speaking of health, John, there was a hush and a bit of hope, I'm sure, that fell over Vaught-Hemingway Stadium when Johnny Football hobbled off a couple of weeks ago with a knee injury, and he came back, and we all know what happened. But now it's not a knee, it's a shoulder that hurt him against Auburn in a loss there. The status, and we've seen some interesting injury statuses applied by a couple of coaches this year, but Kevin Sumlin calls Johnny Manziel hopeful, says his status for the Vanderbilt game is hopeful. Is that any problem at all for Texas A&M as they go into Nashville?
Yeah, I think it may be. Is there some question as we talk here today about the status of the Vanderbilt quarterback? I saw a little Twitter traffic about that myself.
You know what? I believe there is, and that game is at Texas A&M, by the way. I'll tell you what, Austin Carter Samuels, I quit keeping up with him a whole lot after that season opener, but he was good, and you knew that this was an experienced player at Wyoming. You figured that he would adapt, and he really did in that opener against Ole Miss. I think Ole Miss got better from that game. I wasn't sure that Vanderbilt did, but they took advantage of Georgia's injury state and got a big win for James Franklin last week.
Part of the problem with Texas A&M is that Johnny Football covers up a multitude of other sins. That's not a good defense at all, and if he's not at the height of his powers, they're beatable. Auburn going in there and winning was shocking, but it underscores the dramatic turnaround for the Auburn program. 1-6 a year ago, 6-1 now, and frankly, as we've been talking amongst ourselves this week, while Ole Miss and State fans are standing along the side of the road punching each other in the arms as they walk down the road, there goes Auburn speeding off into the distance. They've come from way off the back of the track, and they're at the horizon going away from you.
Well, we've also talked about the recruiting classes and a little bit of a different situation there with Auburn in terms of a head coach coming in who recruited a lot of those players. They were still there. They were still familiar with the system that he ran. There was talent there, and you believed that, or I did, that if Gus Malzahn came in and pressed the right buttons and pointed the people in the right direction, that Auburn had a chance for a quick turnaround, and we're seeing that. Now, Auburn at Texas A&M did something that Ole Miss should have done a better job with, and that is exposing the weak defense of Texas A&M. Ole Miss did not exploit that enough with 38 points. You got to get in the 40s to beat Johnny Manziel, and Auburn was able to do that. Ole Miss a little bit inconsistent on some drives, particularly the now famous 3-and-out there, and the play calling of Hugh Freeze coming under fire. Although that's not a discussion if Jamez Logan doesn't have the second down drop of a 12-yard gain. So anyway, Ole Miss did not exploit that Texas A&M defense enough. Auburn did, and Auburn gets credit for a really impressive road win. But at the same time, Ole Miss was able to come back and really become emotionally invested and win against LSU. John, going back to that game a little bit, I think it's the best job of preparing a team to get ready to play that I've seen at Ole Miss on that covering the beat since 2002. But some other things had to play out there. Now they needed, like I said, they needed Zach Mettenberger to throw downfield, and he did.
LSU's coaching staff has to take responsibility for the failure to adapt, I think. But I don't think there's any question that Ole Miss came out with the bone in the teeth, as they say, and looked coming off the bus, so to speak, like the team that was readier. It looked like LSU maybe thought they could just sleepwalk through that one. It was surprising to me that they continued to try to, when it was established that a few things weren't going to work, they continued to try to make those things work against what read on paper as a patchwork defense. I'm sure arrogantly they may have thought, hey, look, we're going to get to these guys, we'll just keep trying, and it didn't. It did not work.
Well, you know what? There's a certain arrogance that goes with coaching sometimes. And coaches who favor balance, as most of them do, they have a bit of an ego, and they say, hey, this has worked, and we're going to keep doing this. And frankly, I would tend to agree with the multitude of LSU fans that I listened to on WWL while driving home late Saturday night. And let me pause right here and say thank you to the Ole Miss administration for opening up 2 lanes to let us out, and the traffic moved much more smoothly.
Well, I said there'd be less complaints because Ole Miss won.
Right.
So,
well, maybe that had to do with it too. I'll tell you what, just like the Texas A&M game, it wasn't a situation where people left early, and that thought crossed my mind as I was working there after deadline, and when I finally looked at my capable assistant Kyle Alford and said, hey, you, go out to the parking lot and tell me what it looks like and come back. Go do some reconnaissance and let's get an idea of how long we're going to be here. But, getting back to the play calling, LSU had established that it could run, could get some line surge and move with Jeremy Hill. That also played in Ole Miss's favor when LSU chose not to do that. That being said, I saw some plays by the Ole Miss secondary that I just hadn't seen before, namely Chief Brown closing with that very athletic interception in the first half there at the goal line. So, I chalked that one up to emotion. So anyway, hey, shifting gears a little bit, John, I wanted to talk about Missouri. You alluded to them earlier as one of the big stories in the SEC, particularly the Eastern Division. But the question is, how special does this season become for Missouri? And I equate this team to the 1998 Mississippi State team that I covered that won the Western Division. People criticized that MSU schedule that year that did not include Florida, Georgia, or Tennessee. That's not in your control. You
Right.
play the schedule that you're dealt. State won enough games that year and got to Atlanta. And we're looking at Missouri now, and we questioned their schedule early in the season. Now we see them go to Georgia at a time that Georgia was riddled with injuries. We see them face a Florida team with, frankly, a bad offense that you're just not used to seeing from Florida teams. And now, when they play against South Carolina, and I believe that's on the road at South Carolina.
it's homecoming.
Looks like the Gamecocks will be without Connor Shaw, their starting quarterback. So, how far can Missouri take this? They got a 2-game lead in the East. Can they close it out?
A lot will depend on what happens with South Carolina. I think, I believe there's another pretty good quarterback on that South Carolina roster that stepped in for Shaw before. You got a 2-game lead, but you've got 3 games I see that are problematic. South Carolina's at home, but at the end of the year you got to go to Ole Miss, and then you turn right around and you got to play Texas A&M. So that's a 2-game lead could go away real quick. I mean, at least at home against Texas A&M, the last game, that could be a game that could be the game for the berth in the East for them. So to go from last year, a disappointing year for Missouri, 5 wins, some questions outside of Columbia about the future of Gary Pinkel. I never was sold on the question of whether in Columbia there was a lot of concern about that. I think he's got a lot of equity built up. But certainly now an opportunity for them to get to the SEC championship game this year is remarkable, and bears watching in terms of each time they take the field now, all of a sudden they're in the unexpected position of having a big target on their back, an SEC target on their back.
Well, I'll tell you what, and it is a remarkable story. After last year for Texas A&M and Johnny Football, who would have thought that it would be Missouri as the newcomer in position to get to the SEC championship game first? There goes the magic and wonder of the Eastern Division as opposed to the Western Division, I would say. But, Missouri, I thought at Media Days in 2012, it was the Missouri players and Gary Pinkel who kind of got their backs up quicker and stiffer to the question of, oh my goodness, you're in the SEC, how can you handle it? They didn't handle that question quite as good as Texas A&M did, but you know, they struggled last year, 5-7, but this is a program with a history of success under Gary Pinkel. So we'll see if they can close it out. John, good stuff, man. Thanks for being with us.
Always a pleasure.